Hello, BookTube. It's Courtney, America's Jewish Mother. I'm here today to film my Friday Reads video. In the past week, I finished reading 4 books. 2 of those books, Norman Rosenthal's The Gift of Adversity and James Baldwin's Notes of a Native Son, I included more thoughts on those and wrapped them up in my May wrap-up video, so you can go check that out if you want more details on either of those. So I'm not going to talk in detail about those 2 books. I will talk about the 2 other books that I finished in the last week and the 3 books that I am currently reading. And then at the end, I'm going to mention a buddy read that is currently happening that starts today that I'm personally participating in, and I would encourage you all to participate in as well. So the first book that I finished this week, aside from the 2 I already mentioned, is Lot by Bryan Washington. So this is a collection of short stories, all of which are set in Houston. And each of the stories is set in a specific area of Houston, and that's how the stories are titled. They're titled after areas or sections or neighborhoods of Houston. I enjoyed this collection. I gave it 3.5 stars, which means pretty much I liked this and I would recommend it to other people. There's a series of stories in here that are interconnected, and those sort of alternate with standalone stories in here. And the interconnected stories are told from the perspective of a young boy who, I think we learned at the end that his name is Nick. But anyway, so he's the narrator, and you kind of see him throughout this series of stories grow up and sort of come into his own in terms of his sexuality. And he works in his mother's restaurant, and you sort of learn also what becomes of several of his family members as he gets older. So that was sort of interesting to have kind of alternating between standalone stories and then these interconnected stories about Nick. I liked a lot of the stories in here. I think Washington has a very unique voice, and he does a really good job at painting a vivid portrayal of communities in Houston that probably people would consider bad areas of town because of what goes on there, and just because of their impoverished nature, and also drug dealing and prostitution and things of that sort. Those are all topics that get covered in here. I did think that some of the stories kind of tended to blend together a little bit after a while, but I did enjoy them overall. And if you're interested in reading about queer men of color who come from sort of more impoverished, harsher backgrounds, this would be a really good collection to read. And yeah, especially if you're interested in learning about things about Houston that you didn't know. And I knew nothing about Houston because I don't live in Texas, and I don't think I've ever even visited Texas. But yeah, this was good. I would recommend it 3.5 stars. The other book that I finished this week was Cathy Park Hong's essay collection, Minor Feelings, An Asian American Reckoning. I really enjoyed this collection. It has 7 essays in it. And all of them explore what Hong calls minor feelings. And I'm actually gonna look in here and tell you what she says that is, instead of possibly misspeaking on it. So, minor feelings. The racialized range of emotions that are negative, dysphoric, and therefore untelegenic, built from the sediments of everyday racial experience and the irritant of having one's perception of reality constantly questioned or dismissed. Minor feelings arise, for instance, upon hearing a slight, knowing it's racial, and being told, oh, that's all in your head. So all of these essays in some way treat the subject of minor feelings, and Cathy Park Hong kind of blends her own personal history and recollections with explorations of Asian American identity writ large, both historical and contemporary. And I really enjoyed these. I thought they were really insightful and sharp. I thought she did a good job of sort of towing the line between academic writing and sort of like personal, more memoir style writing. There are parts of this that are funny. There are parts of this that are kind of enraging. And yeah, I would definitely recommend this. There was one essay in here that I thought maybe did not go as well with the rest of the collection, and that's just because it seemed to me to be solely a personal recollection about Hong's college days, and it didn't have the same sorts of larger applications that I felt like the other essays did. But, you know, it's not like it was a bad essay. I just felt like that was the one essay in here that I read that I was like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to take away from it. But the other ones are really great. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this if you have an interest in cultural criticism or the subject of racism in America, because one thing Hong comes back to again and again in this collection is her own positionality as an Asian American woman, and how it's sort of weird that on the one hand, she's definitely experienced racism in this country, but on the other hand, it's not like her experience as an Asian woman has been the experience of someone who is African American, for example, right? So she feels kind of like she's a certain amount of guilt, right? So she's like, I feel like unqualified really to speak on the subject of racism, even though it has happened to me. And she also talks a lot about the myth of Asian Americans as a model minority and how, you know, she feels sort of ambivalently about that. But yeah, it's a really good collection, 4 stars. I would recommend it. So I'm currently reading 3 books. One of these books is a buddy read that I'm doing with my friend Taylor from graduate school. That is Henry James's Portrait of a Lady. I am not very far into this. I'm only 2 chapters and I need to read 1 more chapter, so I can't really tell you that much about it so far, except that it's set in Europe, I think England, and Isabel Archer, who is the main character of this novel, has just arrived at this estate, and she's someone's cousin, or someone who lives at the estate's cousin, and everyone's sort of very excited to meet her and find out, you know, what her deal is. So that's pretty much all I can say about it so far. The narratorial style in here, narrative style in here is sort of weird. It's very self-conscious, I would say. But yeah, so we'll see how I get on with it as I continue to read. I'm also currently reading Yaa Gyasi's book Homegoing, and this I did not put on my June TBR, but it's been on my Goodreads TBR for a while, and it finally came available as an ebook through the Athens Clarke County Library. And so I was like, oh, I should get that. So I decided to get it, and so I started that, and I'm about, I think, 30, like not quite 40% of the way through it. It's really good so far. And I feel like I'm like one of the last people on the planet who still hasn't read this book. But in case you were like me, and you were also one of the last people on the planet who has not read this book yet, it is about it's about the 2 different lines. So there are these 2 sisters in Africa. It's set basically in modern day Ghana, but what was at that point referred to as the Gold Coast. So it's about these sisters who are separated from one another and grow up in different households. Back and forth chapters. The lineages of these 2 sisters. So they're children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all the way down to sort of contemporary day. And yeah, I'm about 40% of the way through it. I like the alternating chapters. I think it's useful. It was useful that I knew going into this that each of the chapter, like I was only going to get like this one glimpse of each of the characters before it moved on to the next one. And I think that was useful because it enabled me to kind of enter this with the mindset of, oh, this is really more like interconnected short stories than it is a novel, because otherwise I think I would probably be frustrated if I didn't know that. I would be frustrated that, okay, well, I'm not going to hear any more about Ifia or Essie, or I'm not going to hear more about Quay, or I'm not going to hear more about Ness, or, you know, any of the other characters. So I think it's good to go into it knowing that you're just going to get that one snapshot of their life within the one chapter, and then it's going to move on to the next person down the line. Because again, I think it enables you to sort of approach this with the mindset that this is more like a series of interconnected short stories, which it is. But I'm enjoying it so far. I think it's well written, and I think the descriptions are very vivid, and the characters are, even though you only get, you know, kind of this one glimpse of them per chapter, I think they're pretty well rendered. So yeah, I'm liking that so far. And then the last book I'm reading is connected with the buddy read that I'm going to now speak on. So Books with Shay, in case you're unaware, is hosting a Blackout buddy read. And I will link her channel and announcement video of this down below. And so this is really an effort to get white folks to educate ourselves about racism in America, given all of the current national events that have happened with the murder of George Floyd, all the protesting and rioting that's been going on, and you know, there were other deaths and incidents that happened around the same time and before this too. So this is really, again, an effort to get white folks like me to educate ourselves more. So the Blackout Buddy Read starts today, June 5th, and it continues until Juneteenth, which is June 19th, which is the anniversary of the date that the last slave in the United States was freed. So it's 2 weeks. So there are 2 books in the buddy read. So the first one is White Fragility by DiAngelo. Now, I actually already read this book in April, so I'm not going to reread it, but it was really good. It was actually my top read of the month of April. I gave it 4.5 stars, and I highly, highly recommend it because it does a great job at explaining how white liberal people, and it's aimed at white liberal people like me, but it does a great job of explaining why white liberals like myself do get all defensive and are very not, basically like why we do a bad job when we're confronted with our own racist behaviors and how we can take steps to fix that. And yeah, it's really good. I found it very accessible. So yeah, so White Fragility by DiAngelo is the first read, and the second read is White Rage by Carol Anderson. So I just started this today. I'm not very far into it, but I can already tell that it's basically a sort of historical exploration of how we got to this point in the United States. So I think White Rage does a good job at explaining how we have gotten to this point as a society, and White Fragility does a good job at explaining what are things that white people can do in our own lives to take steps to, you know, be an actual ally or to be anti-racist. So yeah, so those are the 2 books, and I have to say I'm not very far into this. So, you know, I've only read the preface and part of the first chapter, which is about Reconstruction, but already Carol Anderson is not pulling any punches. So I would encourage you, if you have easy access to White Rage and or White Fragility, to participate in the Blackout Buddy Read. So again, it starts today and it goes until June 19th. I will link Books with Shay's announcement video down below. So those are the books that I have finished and or am currently reading. I would love to hear what y'all have been reading and enjoying lately. So please feel free to leave a comment down below, especially if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned and have thoughts about them. So yeah, I hope everyone is doing well. I hope you're staying healthy. I hope you are doing good reading, whatever you're reading. And until next time, would it kill you to call your mother?